freight. So we've got a couple of presentations as we always do. The first one will be Kathleen McFadden, who's the Group Supply Manager at Highland Spring. She's going to be talking about rail freight. And then we've got Tim Dexter, who's the Vehicle Policy Manager at Transport and Environment. That's the name of the organisation, and I'm assured it's a posh version of Transform. So we'll find out when he speaks. He's going to be talking about electric trucks, and he's come up today and he's getting the sleeper back to London tonight. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? Yeah. Good. So that's dedication. Yeah. So we'll just get cracking, I think. Unless there are any new members that I don't know about. If it's not in the briefing you received, there must be no new members. Okay. Right. We'll just get going then. In that case, with Kathleen. Kathleen, if you press your button, that's great.
Hello. Does that work? Can people hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I don't have nearly so impressive a journey. I drove from Paisley and I felt very sorry for myself the entire way. So I'm going to talk to you about Highland Springs rail freight facility today. You'll have to excuse me. I've not spoken at one of these before or participated in it, so if I end up talking about stuff that isn't quite of interest to this group, I can only apologise, but I'll try and keep it brief. If you go to the first slide, please. So this is just a pictorial representation. The containers in here are Highland Spring branded. That's the part that we photoshopped, since ours are not. But the background is Blackford. So I don't know if people here are familiar with Blackford. It's a very small town off the A9, part of Perth and Kinross area. And that is where Highland Spring has its main manufacturing facility, and it's a significant facility at that. So if you could move to the first slide. So a number of years ago, the decision was taken to go for a rail freight solution for Highland Spring. Part of the reason for that is that there was at one time a passenger train station already at site. Just across the road. When you exit the Highland Spring facility, you walk 10 metres and you get to where the station used to be. It was taken out of service at some point in the 50s, and it was used by Network Rail as a sort of maintenance type ground for some time. Part of the reason we chose to look into putting a rail freight facility there is that Blackford is, for those of you who are familiar with it, it's a very rural location. There's sort of one main road in and out, and the production facilities, as I say, at the Oakles is what we call it, our Oakles facility, is very high volume. So what that can lead to is up to 80 heavy goods vehicles travelling in and out per day, which is something that can be a nuisance to people who choose to live in a village of that nature. Part of the draw is the peace and quiet, and that's certainly not conducive to have lots of empty HGVs rattling along. So a little bit here, sorry. So high production volume, so 12 million litres per week. I've just broken that down into 80 HGVs. Hopefully that will make sense to people. But it's definitely a very high volume business. People don't tend to realise quite how big it is because it's water, and water is such a, if you like, it's the low value end of FMCG. So it doesn't get talked about as much as beer companies, for example, but the volume of water that is produced by Highland Spring would equate to all of the Heineken brands, for example, that are sold across the UK in supermarkets. So it's a very substantial size business. If you move on. So the other draw of using rail, carbon reduction. So we're on a decarbonisation journey, as most companies are to some degree or another. And this is one of the biggest milestones for us, was getting this rail freight facility up and running. The community benefits I've already mentioned, and supply chain resilience. So there are a lot of potential pitfalls in having such a large business operating from such a small area. So there's a need for sure to shore up our ability to continue to provide a timely service for our customers, suppliers, etc. You move on. So one of the biggest parts of making our rail freight a success and getting it to launch was collaboration between many different businesses and institutions. A lot of them are here, their logos are here. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that without collaboration and having these people all working towards the same goal and wanting it to work, this would not, it would not have been a successful project. It was extremely difficult. But actually, there was a real focus on making it a success. And for me, it was one of these things. I actually joined Highland Spring after the rail facility launched. And what people talked about a lot at the time was the spirit of Blackford, is what they called it. The spirit of Blackford was the phrase used to describe the intense collaboration that happened between parties to make a go of this. So some of the things that were considered as part of the project, one is obviously sustainability. I'll go on a little bit to what the rail freight actually means for us with regard to sustainability in a couple of slides' time. But certainly our commitment to having a more sustainable offering for consumers, customers, etc., was a huge consideration, given that the cost of rail freight is not yet competitive with regards to the comparison to road. The local community was a very big one. Our site, where it's positioned and how to access it, was also a consideration, as was floodplains. So it's a very prone to flooding area, so an awful lot of work had to be done to ensure that we didn't build a facility which was going to sort of immediately become redundant as a result of flooding. You move on a slide again. So this bit's more about the community consideration, because it's what I end up talking about the most. So my involvement with government, politicians, as far as my job is concerned, is pretty much confined to giving rail tours every so often to people who want to visit our site. And one of the things that we talk about, again, because of the types of people who come to visit us, is living in harmony with the local community. So a huge consideration, and the amount of investment and planning that went into making this facility something that the community could get behind was really significant. So because there is still a passenger train that goes through Blackford but doesn't stop there, and we have built our facility right sort of parallel to it, what we ended up doing is putting in an acoustic barrier, which essentially means that the town is now quieter than it ever was. So you're not just deadening the sound for the freight terminal, but also for the passenger train that was always going through that area as well. Continuous welded rail is a very exciting concept. So this is just to eradicate some of the clickety-clack irritation that happens if you live near a railway. And probably our most impressive piece of kit, if you ever choose to visit, and we're very open to that. So if anybody is interested and wants more information as a train junkie, you're more than welcome. Our crane is very bespoke to us. It's a tiny little baby crane, and it is absolutely silent. So if you imagine the sort of, there's a couple of different ways to tell this. It's either your soft closed cabinets or your toilet seat, you know. So when you're lifting and laying down pallets, you don't get these sort of horrible clanging sounds that then echo through the community. So it's a very silent operation. The crane is all GPS enabled, and that's how it operates. So there are no big loud alarms that will blare if you go too close to it. It will just stop. It is Coney Cranes that we worked with, who are one of our collaborators for that, and that is operated at site by a colleague from John G. Russell. If we move on. So the official opening, although we weren't yet operational until January, but the official opening happened in August of 22. Trains started running in January of 23. The event was significant for the business, keep saying that word, but this was the first facility of its kind to open in Scotland for over 10 years at the time. So it was quite a big deal for the community, for the people who worked at Highland Spring, but also for local government and government that wasn't quite so local as well. So it was opened by the First Minister, and there were various events that took place across the day in the week of opening with our staff, with our community, and with some of our key stakeholders, both political and otherwise. So since then, because if you stand still, you're moving backwards. In terms of innovation, one of the things that we have looked into with our partners at John G. Russell is the introduction of larger containers. Very boring unless you're a logistics geek, but these are often referred to as extra long trailers, I think, XLTs. So we introduced 51 foot. I think they come in either 51 or 53, generally speaking. And each container can now carry 15% more water than their prior 45 foot equivalent. 18% of what we move southbound from Blackford to Crick, which is Daventry, Rugby area in England, 18% of those movements are now done in 51 foot containers. So that sort of removes a few more HGVs per year. So we had an initial set of commitments, which is the following slide, but this improves them. So this is a change we only made this year. It's another 1,200 heavy goods vehicles off the road as a result of this particular change, but there's lots more still to come. So this is just some numbers. I won't bore you with them all, but I'm going to pick out the ones that I tend to tell people when they come to visit us at the facility. I had a corporate comms colleague who told me people only ever remember 3 of the things you say. So the 3 facts I'm going to pick from here are 8,000 HGV movements per year off the road. So that's what this rail freight facility did for Highland Spring and for the environment. That saves over 3,000 tonnes of CO2. And it is the first, as I said, facility of its kind to open for over 10 years in Scotland. So in terms of our next steps, there's a lot that can happen here. Nothing that is certain, but our vision for extending our rail freight facility and our rail offering is to add to it in increments over the next probably 5 years would be the most likely time period that we could work to. The first step for us is the Sunday service, which is something the local community is actually quite resistant to, but sort of ironically would actually reduce the noise on a Sunday. It's the noisiest day of the week, given that there are no trains that run, so you have more HGV movements. The 24/7 manufacturing facility, so what you don't put on rail must move by road. We're in initial stages of discussing that, and we have worked a little with Perth and Kinross Council on what that might look like. The next 2 are again for logistics geeks or network geeks. So we need to have rail connected warehouses everywhere we operate, but at the moment we're only rail connected in the south, and we need to be rail connected in the north. So we currently have an external warehouse in Cumbernauld, but it is not connected to a rail freight facility. So what it means is only our distribution that happens in the south can be via rail as the first movement in that journey. In the north, everything moves by road. So the eventual aspiration is that we are able to do our distribution in Scotland via rail as the first step on that journey as well. Once we've done that, that would be the key lever to enable our second rail path. This is something we already have permission to do, but we don't have the volume yet to make it happen. So once we have that, we'll put that in place. And a third rail path is sort of more vaguely off into the future, and would effectively mean that we get up to 90% of our production from our Oakles facility would then be moved via rail. At the moment, we're at 29%. So you can see in this bar chart on the right hand of the slide what each of these different improvements would do in terms of the percentage of what we produce at that site being moved via rail rather than road. And that is my final slide. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. That was fascinating. And I think because Kathleen's presentation is a little bit different to the second one, I think maybe we'll have questions and comments on that one first. I suppose my question is, if we can just open up, you are still using lorries.
Yes.
You said you're using lorries on a Sunday. Are you using them on other days of the week as well?
Yes, we are. So we're currently limited to 6 trains per week, and that is 1 per day, every day apart from Sunday. So what that means is that of everything that's produced at that site, knowing that it will all eventually move away from that site, only 29% of it is rail moved right now. So 70% is still reliant upon HGVs.
And where do they tend to go, the lorries?
So mostly they will go to Cumbernauld in order to facilitate distribution in Scotland, Central Belt mostly. Rarely will we ever send an HGV down south. So almost all of our southbound movements, unless it's by exception, will be via rail.
So if the product's going to England, it'll go by rail to Daventry, and it'll be distributed from there.
Exactly that. So you make an important distinction between a primary and a secondary movement. So almost everything that we produce, and we're not alone in this, has to move twice. So first to a distribution facility and then second onwards to the customer. The actual holy grail of any sort of logistics network would be that you can take one of those legs out, but there are certain considerations for a business like ours. One of them is a quality hold. So once your product is produced, you must retain it for a certain period of time. That limits the amount of direct deliveries you can do. So yes, our primary movements are rail, and everything thereafter, all of it would at that point be road.
I see Sarah Duncan wants to come in. Sarah.
Hello, Sarah. Yes. It's a question on the amount of containers you had. I'm a logistics geek, so thanks very much for those slides. You said 22 containers per train. Is that correct?
Correct,
Is that the
yes.
number? I mean, so are you constrained by length there so that you can't add to that? So if we could talk a bit about that, please.
Yes, we are. So we have a relatively small platform at Blackford that constrains us to 11 wagons, and we can get 2 containers per wagon. The good news is those wagons are large enough to permit 51-foot containers rather than 45, which is a little bit of additional benefit we've managed to get. We do, however, connect to through Coatbridge, so that's like the middle step. It's not exactly the middle, but we have a step there before we go on to Daventry or Rugby or Crick, depending on how your geography works. So at that point, more wagons can be added. So we will occasionally shunt initially from our production site to Coatbridge, where the train is extended, and then add to the train at Coatbridge to move south. So although 29% of our production leaves the Oakles manufacturing facility by rail, actually 42% of what we make ultimately is moved by rail south.
Is that okay, Sarah?
Yeah, I was just, because you were saying that adding on a Sunday service would help. So I was wondering, how do you get more on the rail with the existing services, or is it by adding additional services? Is that your solution?
Adding additional services at this time is our solution, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Mason, MSP.
Thank you. Well, yes, kind of linked to that, I was thinking about constraints as well, and you're talking about the second path and the third path.
Yes.
Because as I understand it, especially as you go further south, the rail lines are very congested. So is that a commitment you've got? And I mean, I was just reading this stuff we were sent about the rail freight group and the concerns about Great British Railways coming in. I mean, is that something you're involved in? How certain can you be that you can expand if you want to?
So we have certainty with regards the second rail path. That's already gone through DRS. It's gone through all the sort of governing bodies that need to have a say in it. Have had a say. So we have already have permission to run it. We just don't have the volume to run it. So we're really secure there. We haven't begun to explore the potential for a third rail path because it's so far in our future at the moment. With regards to Sunday service, we've had permission in principle. But we haven't yet taken it that step further. So at the moment, we're not particularly concerned and haven't been given any reason from any of the bodies that we deal with to be concerned.
I'm not a geek in this. I'm interested. But so who actually gives you permission?
So we work with a partner who deals with DRS on our behalf. So we work with John G. Russell, and they work with 6 or 7 organisations, all of whom have to have some element of say in what takes place. So I think DRS and Network Rail are our main sort of potential bottlenecks, if you like, but haven't yet been.
Okay. You may have said it earlier, but are the trains electric?
Well, no, because the tracks aren't. But if you want to get into that, I am delighted to talk about it.
Well,
like,
let's go.
For every politician who's visited the site, that's been a kind of big topic of conversation.
Right, so the line's not electrified.
The train can be, it's hybrid. We could run the train electric, but the line isn't, so we can't.
Okay, right. Have you explored other technologies? Like
other technologies?
Batteries? No.
I imagine your next speaker
diesel.
is going to know a lot more about that than me.
Probably.
The train is diesel.
Right, Dave Defoe. Dave always asks something. Okay. He's one of our regulars.
Okay, well, it's not about cycling. So the line's not electrified and it's also single track. And I was just wondering if the single track aspect causes you any problems, and might that be a problem in getting the third path, for example, or any other problems? Thank you.
I'm really not sure. So nothing has caused me a problem as yet with regards to it being single track. Sorry? It's not single track. Okay, well then. I'm being told I'm not sure is your speak button on. Can everybody hear you say that?
Somebody in the room said it's not single track.
Yeah.
Well, is it single track or isn't it?
Oh, I'm not an expert, so.
No, it's not.
Double track. Yeah.
It's double track. So trains can pass each other.
Yeah.
Right, it's double track.
But then, listen, I am not a rail expert, so right. I am the customer of a rail expert. So there's a limit to what I'll be able to confirm, but I can certainly go away and take any questions.
I thought most of the line is single track. Is it the line from Inverness south?
Lots of heads shaking in the room. I think everybody feels pretty confident it's double track.
No, it's double track. South of Perth, south of Stanley Junction.
So it's a little further north, that would be an issue, we think. Okay, so we're not far enough north for that to be a problem, or so I'm being told by the room. Such an education.
Right. Now, if you're speaking in the room, can you say who you are and where you're from? Sarah Boyack did want in, but this single double track thing seems to have sparked off a flurry of hands. So we'll go down there, and then we'll come to Sarah.
Hi, Frank Roach from Hightrans here. Can you tell me how many containers you've got in the cycle, and are they always solid-sided, or have you got curtain-siders that you're using on rail?
So all of our containers are box containers, no curtain siders, and we currently have 90 boxes that we cycle through. We have, though, when we've had particular bottlenecks in the south, pushed that up to 133 has been our highest this year, caused us many, many logistical issues when it happened, but we tend to stay 90 and under.
Yeah, thanks, Martin Bignell, Rail Freight Group. I'll stick my head above the parapet. Yeah, it is double track. Just to pick up on your point about electrification, obviously the bit to where you are isn't electrified, but south of Coat Bridge is. So are you running electric trains from Coat Bridge to Crick?
No, they're still diesel. I don't know why that is, though. Like I say, not the expert, the customer of the expert, but the entire journey is diesel at this point.
Right, Sarah.
So that might not be ideal in terms of reducing carbon emissions, but did you say that it removes 8,000 HGVs off the A9?
That's correct.
So that is a massive impact. And there's something about how do you encourage other companies to move on to rail freight, because you made that reference earlier about it's still not competitive in terms of comparing with using lorries, and I suppose that's there's both a capacity issue in terms of roads. A9 not got lots of capacity, but there's that other issue about how do you make it work so that other companies will start doing this as well, and it creates presumably a better economic opportunity for the rail freight sector.
So the more we scale up rail freight, the more economically viable it is for businesses to use. Now, we are quite unique in our location. We're not really that near anything else, which is part of the reason why cost is a consideration, and not a happy consideration for us when we look at rail. That being said, every business has a set of sustainability commitments. It's not part of our journey to net zero. We can't have a journey to net zero until such times as we have electrified rail, to your point. However, it does significantly decarbonise our operation. What we have done, it's not only politicians who tour the rail freight. I didn't anticipate at this point in my career being a tour guide, but I am one. I also have customers that will come visit me. So I've had, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, etc. And what I do is I always tell them that they can speak to their other suppliers, ideally non-competitive suppliers, and they'd be more than welcome to the site to have a tour. We can talk to them about what options there are for us to work with them potentially, but also just sell them a little on the idea of rail freight as being part of their business too. But it isn't just about a scalable solution. It's also about when does it become viable for investment? When does infrastructure start to get improved? What is the tipping point at which we invest in rail and take it seriously as a future of freight? And we're not there.
So just picking up on that, are there any other companies using your trains? And just before you answer that, there's a reverse journey, isn't there, once it gets to Daventry? So what happens on the way back?
So on the way back, the train is filled. So it's effectively a backhauled operation. So you're filling it both south and north until you get to Coatbridge. And the final part of the journey brings empty containers to Blackford. That is not ideal, but there is not a demand for anything to be put into those containers at this point in time. So yes, there's a journey back north. It is mostly used, but that final stretch where it goes further north than the central belt of Scotland is not used. What was the first part of your question? Sorry.
The first part was, when you're heading south, are any other companies using the train? So
as yet, no. However, I am currently having some confidential discussions with another very large volume supplier in the UK about the potential of that happening. That is a Highland Spring discussion where the product originates in Blackford, or Oakle's manufacturing facility. It is an introduction that I will make to our rail partners if the opportunity originates at Coatbridge or further south in Blackford.
Okay. Yes, yourself.
Neil Gould, a new participant. My background is over 40 years in multimodal supply chain, both in the UK and abroad, and currently engaged in moving other liquids out of Scotland and the rest of the world. I picked up on your comment on cost as well, and I think the issue is Blackford, not the rail. It's because we know that from product that we move southbound from Scotland, using Coatbridge is actually more competitive than certainly road. We wouldn't dream of roading it. So I think it is purely the volume. To the previous question, the main constraint, as I say, someone who's been engaged on and off with getting freight on rail, is the speed at which the rail infrastructure and network can react to the requirements. I don't know how long it took to get Blackford up and running as a case for the obvious rail movement, but 12 years I'm advised by my new colleague from the Rail Freight Group. So I think that doesn't help business make fast decisions on the ability to use rail. As business, very happy to use rail if it's available.
I think you're almost certainly right about your comment with regards to Blackford and it being this specific location that makes the cost consideration different versus if you were in the central belt. For me, one of the things I struggle with is triple movement of any stock. The moment you have to move it 3 times, it's a problem. So if your primary movement of stock before you do your secondary onto customer becomes 2 movements, even if one of them is rail, To my experience, that always costs more. So even if you're doing road, rail, or like it still costs you more, even if you're in one of those better locations, if you must double shunt.
Sarah, again.
It was just on the piece on getting people to move to the rail. So I work for William Grant and Sons, so we move a lot of whiskey and other alcohol products all over the world. We use some of the rail. Coatbridge and Moss End is the hub we use. We're based in Bells Hill, so we're very close to them. Some of the immediate constraints that I start to see is the peak volumes. So I don't know if that impacts Highland Spring. You've got your dedicated service, or if that's anything that anyone else in the room has experienced. This time of year can be very difficult for us to even commit or to get that space.
So you're right that it's less of a consideration for Highland Spring because we have a dedicated service that we own. So we are guaranteed to be able to move that sort of basic level that we spoke about, those 22 containers per day, 6 days a week. What I will say is that we have roughly 60 containers per week that we move via road to Coatbridge that cannot fit onto our rail service, if you like. And yes, I will notice, particularly in the summer, that we get less space on secondary trains that run that are not our own. So I acknowledge there can be an issue with some congestion at certain times of the year.
And Sarah, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I mean, what kind of percentage of your products are you moving by rail?
I don't have that number to hand. It is a small proportion just now. We are working with our forwarder to move all of our UK products. So we bottle in Bells Hill, and then we move down to Doncaster, which is essentially a rail link. So that's a lot of volume. I don't know if I can really share that just now. And then there's an element of export. So down to Liverpool, we do rail quite a bit. So that's our American exports. So we are talking significant volumes, but I would like more. I think we do face some problems when we get to Felixstowe on the rail with congestion there. But it is a bit of a challenge when we come into peak, and if we're not planning it to the nth degree, which I know is a challenge for the whisky industry.
Thanks
I
for
didn't answer your
that.
question there. Sorry.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, just on the capacity thing, I mean, it speaks a little bit to what we just heard there about the ability to react. You will get peaks and troughs in certain industries, and there is a need to move more volume. And I think that really speaks to the need for Scotland and Scotland's railway to really think on a national network basis, because we often talk about rail freight in Scotland, but the reality is 80% of Scotland's rail freight is cross-border, sort of the focus of tonight. So of course you are ultimately dependent on capacity coming past Manchester on the West Coast Main Line through the Midlands, because most of it, as we've heard, goes to sort of the South Midlands, Crick, Doncaster, that type of area. So I mean, a lot of that ability to increase and decrease capacity, you are kind of a bit stuck because you haven't got that wiggle room on the network to run extra trains and run more trains. And that's, I guess, a function of history. We tend to build a network that's just about good enough, but that doesn't give us any room to do much else with it.
You don't have to respond. You could just agree.
I can. I just agree with you. So
Yeah,
okay. I'll be nodding. I'll be nodding.
Ken Haig.
Thanks, Chair. Just through the Load My Rail campaign, we actually approached Diageo several times to try and encourage Diageo to, look at the freight side of things. I mean, obviously, I think the ability to react obviously played an impact, but also having a foreign entity making decisions about investment in Scotland seems to be slow. I mean, we've got up to 100 HGV lorry movements per day coming out of Leiden. So, the potential is huge to remove a hell of a lot of HGVs from the road if we could persuade Diageo to make the change.
Sorry, I'm just curious about what the opposition is with regards to the reluctance to make such a change. It doesn't affect me personally, but yeah.
It wouldn't really be for me to comment on Diageo's reluctance other than cost, as far as we know. And certainly, in the early days of the rail campaign, we had meetings with Malcolm Logistics, their rail freight side. They seemed very, very keen on it. We got the impression that Diageo wanted someone else to put in the infrastructure into their premises, basically. So all they had to do was load the train vehicle, load up the containers onto the trains themselves. But to me, it's a huge, huge opportunity that has been missed. It's not to say it should be ruled out, it's just been missed at this point.
No, I understand that, and I know it's a slightly cheeky question to ask, but it gets to the fact that even if mile for mile you can say that rail is more cost effective, the practical reality of it doesn't always match that, and it can be a real barrier for businesses to participate. I know certainly the financial modelling that I look at when I'm trying to think of what is the 5-year plan for rail doesn't always stack up. So it's about when your business sits down to make that decision between what is the sustainable way forward and what is the most cost-effective way forward, what matters most in what moment. And sometimes those decisions can be very tricky, and they're not always going to be motivated first and foremost by cost, but they often need to be, particularly when economic conditions are a certain way.
Colin
Highland, Transform Scotland. So I know that Highland Spring exports products overseas. What share of your business do you know would that be, and does that presumably all go by rail, or is there other?
So none of our export goes via rail, and it is only 3% of our business. Part of the reason why it doesn't is because it's such a small proportion of our business. It's not manufactured in the format at which it will then be exported. So it goes where certain changes are made in terms of how it's palletized and how it's wrapped and how it's stored and etc. etc. And it is moved entirely by HGV and then ships. Yeah, so we have a lot of business in UAE. I say a lot of business, it's 3% of Highland Spring, right, as our export. But if you look at that 3%, a big share of it is the UAE. I don't have the proportions really much beyond that. Thank you.
Okay, there's one more online. I can't quite see the full name. Boyce.
Hi there.
Veronica
yes,
Boyce.
It's Veronica. Yes. Hi everyone. Just to give some context from our business perspective, I work with Edrington Distillers, obviously a Scotch whisky exporter. We export to 64 countries globally, all of our products. It's a very deliberate model that we ship via rail. That's obviously our second move. Our production bottling site is based in Glasgow. Our first move will be via truck. We will generally use, as Sarah has confirmed, the rail terminals in Coatbridge and Moss End and move down to the southern ports in the south. Now, certainly for us, we have to use rail. We certainly won't be putting trucks down to all the southern ports. So for us, it's twofold. There's a commercial consideration, and there's obviously a sustainability consideration. And then the third one is actually accessing the vessels that we require to move our goods globally. So all in all, yeah, I would suggest that we're probably 80% plus of our volume, export volume, moving via rail. For me personally, I'm a big advocate of everything Scottish, as everyone is probably in this forum. The problem is that the deep sea ports are all based in the south, so commercially and transactionally, we have no choice but to move our freight 400 miles to reach the ports. My wish would be that Scotland takes more ownership of how we move our goods internationally. And for me, the encouragement is about proper infrastructure within Scotland itself and not accessing ports, unfortunately, down south. And that's our only way to route goods to market. We obviously have the ports available in Scotland, namely Grangemouth and Greenock. We will access them from time to time, but the problem with that is lead times are extended. So for us as a commercial business, we're always tasked with moving goods swiftly and efficiently and as cost effectively as we possibly can, and reaching our customers, which, you know, as you can understand, the global reach, that's really important that we do so. So yes, I would like to see better infrastructure, but it depends where that comes from. Does it come from government? Does it come from the commercial owners, or does it come from the actual owners that are manufacturing the goods and moving it? So there's a lot to discuss there to actually get it to where it needs to be.
And just a question for you, Veronica.
Yeah.
Is the issue then at the Scottish ports that there just aren't enough ships? Is that what you're saying?
Possibly, yes. Unfortunately, we're living in a world where, you know, many ports are congested, so that we take the peaks and the troughs of volume moving through both ports and rail terminals. We do see constraints at particular times of year, especially now. You'll probably be familiar with the potato season, or the growing season in Scotland. As Edrington, as an exporter, exporting 52 weeks of the year, we see it being constrained maybe for 3 or 4 months because of other products that are moving seasonally. So it has to level out. The capacity has to be there 52 weeks of the year. So yes, we are constrained by limited vessel options or the peaks of trade, probably across other sectors as well.
Okay, thank you very much. One final comment from John Mason.
Well, also then for Veronica, I mean, is it absolutely impossible that you can connect directly to the rail network? I probably should know where you're based, but I'm not 100%. Or is the cost of that connection just absolutely prohibitive? Because I think you said you're taking it, first of all, by HGV to the railway.
Yes, and that journey is probably less than 20 miles from our production site to a rail terminal. So it's actually not, I suppose, the worst thing that it is only moving 20 miles, but certainly the extra 380 miles is covered by train straight to a port to connect with a vessel there. We value that methodology and will continue to do that, but I'm not sure there's any benefits of putting a rail link directly into our own facility, and who would actually, you know, contribute to the funding of that and what benefit it would give. So I think we're a long way off of moving to a rail terminal at our site.
May I? If you ever do want to investigate that, even with regards to how to set it up and how to go about funding and who might get involved and why they might do it, I would just like to welcome you to our site if you want to have a look at our facility and learn a little bit about why we took that decision, a bit more about why we took that decision, given that you were in the industry and will be somewhat expert yourself, and you can see whether or not it's something you'd like to explore at any juncture.
Yeah, no, most certainly. And I think, well, to give you some further insight, I think I've been at your site many, many years ago before it went live again. And I had a previous job with a rail operator as well. That was DB Schenker back in the day. So yes, no, absolutely. I'll take you up in that one.
There you go. And Sarah was nodding as well, so she might come
also
along.
Very welcome. Look, we want to be a demonstrator.
I think you'll have a few takers.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, can I just jump in, because some of us are here as part of the SWA Transport Working Group. So I'm sure as that working group, so that covers myself and Veronica at Edrington. I think there's a few others online. We would love to come as a group for that, for sure.
Yes.
And look, we'd be delighted to have you. So for us, the more people get interested in rail freight and the more they take it up as an option for their business, the more viable it is. So we're more than happy to entertain you at site whenever you wish to come. So you can get in touch with me directly. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can come through our corporate comms office, and they will certainly set something up for you.
Yeah, we could perhaps do something through our SWA group, Sarah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. Look forward to seeing you.
There you go, result. And whiskey and water, of course, go very well together. That's good. Right, so we will move on, I think. So thanks, Kathleen. I think a round of applause in the room. And we'll move on to our second speaker, Tim Dexter, as I said earlier, Vehicle Policy Manager at Transport and Environment, to talk about electric trucks. Tim.
Thanks very much, and I feel like I've come a bit empty-handed without anything to offer in terms of a day trip out for anyone at the end, so sorry for that. Yeah, lovely to be here and speaking with you all. So yes, if you go on to the next slide, I'm from Transport and Environment. We are never too humble to know that you might not know who we are, but we are Europe's leading NGO working on clean transport and energy. As Graham said at the start, or Colin said at the start, we are effectively the European version of Transform Scotland. We have offices in 7 countries across Europe, and we're also now expanding out into Asia Pacific too. We are a membership organisation supported by 59 organisations across those countries, with 3 in the UK, of which Transform Scotland is one. And on to the next slide. So here to talk about the need for cleaner trucks. So a bit of an overview of the necessity for this. HGVs are the source of around a fifth of transport emissions in the UK, and that comes down to around 16% in Scotland at last count. And they have a disproportionate impact on air quality, particularly within urban areas. And I think that's probably not of any surprise to anyone who sees large HGVs idling or stuck in traffic along the roads. They're having a substantially greater impact than the number equivalent of cars by comparison. But it's also important to remember that eHGVs are becoming increasingly cost effective and are going to lead to lower total cost of ownership for operators over the coming years. So at the moment, as we'll explore, then there aren't very many of these on the roads currently, but the business case is becoming increasingly more attractive, and we're starting to reach the tipping point now where for most operators and most use case scenarios, these are a more than a viable alternative, and freight forwarders or shippers can start to see the cost benefit of moving to electric within 5, 6, 7 or 8 years. On to the next slide, if you can. So talking about the growth opportunity, as we do in so many ways when it comes to shifting to net zero, our general policy approach to this when it comes to electric HGVs is that we would like to see a zero emission vehicle mandate that obviously reflects the ZEV mandate that we have in place for cars and vans across the UK. And we like to try and point to some of the progress that's been made when it comes to the decarbonisation of the car and van fleet since that's been introduced. Obviously, we're still in the very early phases. We're only coming to the end of the second year of compliance for that now. But since the ZEV mandate was introduced, we've seen £23 billion worth of investment in the UK in vehicle and battery plants, and £6 billion worth of investment in charging infrastructure. So a huge amount of money coming in and helping to lead the transition and bringing with it well-paid jobs and improvements to local economies. And there's a similar opportunities that exist for the truck sector, where the right policies can unlock massive UK investment and growth opportunities. The APC estimates opportunity for 2.4 billion in the UK vehicle supply chain alone for trucks. Obviously, we don't have the same level of manufacturing for HGVs in the UK as we do for cars. We do have the DAF plant in Leyland, or primarily based in Leyland, that is I think the 5th biggest producer of HGVs in Europe currently. But there are still lots of opportunities that exist when it comes to upgrading the charging infrastructure and transitioning warehousing and the rest of the public infrastructure as well. Next slide. But at the moment, it seems that we are currently missing this opportunity. We do have some form of regulation when it comes to CO2 standards for HGVs that was inherited from since Brexit and the retained EU law legislation, but that has been updated in the EU and we haven't followed suit. So as we can see some comparison there to the UK sales of electric HGVs compared to some European neighbours. Last year the UK was at 0.72% of total sales. Currently in the last 12 months That's moved up to just 1.3%. So we're really going at a snail's pace. That's 500 large trucks of the 41,000 that have been registered in the last 12 months. And a substantial number of those have come from Amazon, who have just brought over or rolled out over 100 electric trucks, and the zero emission demonstrator program, which has been run by government. So taking those out of the equation, we'd still be pretty stagnant. On to the next slide, please. But this stagnation is despite the fact that many practical barriers have been addressed. So 60% of HGVs can decarbonise today without the need to wait for public infrastructure. There is the ability to rely on depot-based charging. We've heard anecdotally from many operators who run electric trucks that when they brought the trucks in-house, they are performing better than expected. They're able to use them for the vast majority of use cases. Ironically, probably one of the most difficult ones to use for is moving liquids. So water is a struggle simply because of the volume and weight. But as they often point out, that isn't always the case, that you need to run at maximum capacity, running at maximum distance. So electric trucks, even the more early ones, are still being are still able to work across most scenarios. And we also are coming to the first, as I said, the zero emission demonstrator program that's funded by government, that's supporting, that's working with lots of partners from manufacturers to shippers and charging infrastructure, is coming to the first big reporting period at the end of this year, where we'll start to get a lot of this use case data, where they're tracking very intensively how these trucks are being run, what scenarios are being run with, when they are being run for particular cases, are they coming back with or what level of charge are they coming back with? So we start to understand and build a picture of how much further they could run and where any further barriers might be. OEMs, though, are already offering battery electric HGVs that can run for well over 4.5 hours, require about 3 to 4 hours to recharge. It's important to remember that for trucks as well, it isn't necessarily the case that we're comparing that to your typical filling up at a petrol station over 5 minutes, because the charging opportunity comes when you're unloading and loading, so at depot stops. So sorting out depot charging points at your own depot, but also at warehousing, can help to mitigate any of the logistical barriers here as well. Next slide, please. And we talked about cost parity. So we have, it's very small, but on the left-hand side in this chart here, we have some descriptions of different use case scenarios, whether you're running local, urban smaller size deliveries up to larger regional articulated supermarket deliveries, where we anticipated with a study that we did a couple of years ago that we start to reach cost parity in terms of total cost of ownership for running these trucks, and it was estimated that mid-30s that would be the case in all types of operation, and judging by how things are developing so far, that seems to be on track. But it's really important that, of course, that we start to in order to achieve this, that we have the regulation in place that's driving the supply side to help drive down costs of the initial cost of purchasing these vehicles. So without this regulation, we don't think that it's going to take off voluntarily. Current regulations only require small reductions in 2025 to 2030, but we do have the growth demand there. So we have a number of suppliers who are already committed to reaching their net zero targets. What we do need to see is that supply start to increase, and we see the issue currently where we see this kind of trifecta of necessity with infrastructure, the demand and supply. Supply at the moment seems to be the initial barrier. We need to get over this hurdle of there being a trickle through of units to start being able to roll them out on greater levels of production. We talked already, I did just mention about the demand driven by these fleets, but in order to deliver the CO2 reduction needed, we need to see these regulations come in fast. So we're looking, as the current commitment is, to get to a complete phase out of internal combustion engine by 2040. So here we have a previous trajectory that had a 10% start for 2026. We're not saying that's realistic anymore, and we are waiting for the government to bring a consultation to the table of how this regulation, what regulation would look like. But we did have voluntary targets in place from manufacturers to reach 50% by 2030. Given the statistics that we saw before about us currently being at around 1.5%, we're obviously way off track. So again, it just re-emphasizes the need for that kind of certainty and regulation in order to be able to reach the target by 2040. Next slide. And not quite formatted properly, but I just wanted to touch on some of the alternatives here. So there is often a lot of arguments made for alternative fuels within HGVs, but we don't see these as being realistically scalable in order to use within HGV freight. First off, crop-based biofuels that a lot of this would rely on, particularly virgin, can often emit 16% more CO2 when you take in the full account of the production of these fuels. So that's simply upstreaming some of the carbon emissions while reducing it directly from the tailpipe. It also competes with fuel production. 90% of global biofuel production still relies on food crops, so that could feed over the calorie intake requirement of 1 billion people every day. And we also would require significant more land use compared to electric. So here we have a diagram showing the comparison where 32 megahectares are required to provide the fuel for 130 million ICE vehicles, or this is cars, compared to 1 megahectare that would require, filled with solar panels, could help power 400 million EV cars, and that's because of the improved efficiency of electric vehicles compared to internal combustion ones. So alternative fuels that do genuinely reduce emissions need to be prioritised for those sectors that cannot decarbonise through electrification, and that's primarily shipping and aviation. We already have legislation coming regarding sustainable aviation fuel mandates that's going to require significant increase in the production of sustainable aviation fuel and require a lot of the resources for alternative fuels. So that's where it needs to be prioritised, and it's not scalable to mandate it for other sectors, including HGVs and cars. And finally, what's needed? So I did talk about the ZEV mandate that we're currently pushing for with the Westminster government, but in terms of what's required at the national level, this still needs to be followed by demand side support. So whether that's ZEV targets for large fleets and fleet operators, zero emission freight zones, as we've seen rolled out in the Netherlands, and also continued support for purchase initiatives as well, particularly for SMEs and during this earlier period before we start to see the costs being driven down as we anticipate with the mass production and mass rollout of eHGVs. Improved strategy and targets for charging rollouts, particularly when it comes to grid connections. That is a huge barrier at the moment, and we know that that DNOs could be a lot more strategic in the way that the grid rollouts could be done, particularly by anticipating where the need is going to be and how it's being prioritised, and also tackling further barriers for depot charging as well as for the public charging infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's good. So we'll open it up, but I'll start as I always do. So one of the barriers to people buying electric cars is lack of charge points and concerns about range. Now you had a slide up there where you put a new truck made by Daimler, so I'm guessing that's the best there is, and that seemed to do 300 miles on one charge.
Yeah.
Which isn't very far.
I mean, so they are improving all the time, and the rate, I think that slide even in itself might be slightly outdated now, where you have other companies claiming we're going up to 450 or even 500 kilometers on a single charge. So again, it just goes to show when you do start to focus and attention does start to turn towards production and innovation for these units, we will start to see that more rapid improvement of range.
Don't try and make it sound better by using kilometres. I said 300 miles.
I couldn't do the maths in my head so quickly.
Okay, right. I'll open it up. Yes, I think you were first. Yeah.
Thanks. What's the payload penalty for a 44-ton BEV?
So the payload penalty is, well, you do have the 1 ton increase, so it goes up to 45 ton for a BEV, so you are allowed to take more, but the payload increase is generally expected to be around 2 to 3 tons. So there is possibly more that could be done. So obviously this is because of the increased battery weight on electric vehicles. These units do weigh a lot more than the ICE equivalents. So there is, because of the limitations on what can be run at maximum weight for road wear and for going over bridges, operators aren't able to fill them to the same level of capacity currently necessarily. There is actually also, it is being looked at the European Commission level, so it'd be interesting to see whether governments over here do start to pay attention to about changing the possible rules on weights and dimensions and payload as well.
I happen to look it up. It's 340 miles is 555 kilometres, and that's as far as it is to Crick. So just to put it in the context of the last discussion. I suppose my question isn't about the trucks. I think you're right, technology will improve. I guess we'll have to get to some clever battery technology to make them lighter and more dense, otherwise you are facing this weight penalty. But I guess the question I have is about scale and capacity. You talked about the DNOs getting connections to the grid, but there are something like 11,000 HGVs crossing the border into Scotland and out of Scotland every day. There's something like 1,500, 2,000 going up and down the A9 every day. Now, if you're looking at juicing those up over a 6 or 7 hour window during the day, that's an enormous amount of electricity. And I simply don't think that we'll generate enough to be able to do it over the next 20 years.
It's a fair question. So, I mean, we know that a lot of work is being done because it's not just the transport sector, and it's definitely not just HGVs and road transport sector where this electrical requirement is coming from. And we know it is one of the main areas of focus for the DESNZ department in Westminster about being able to increase that capacity and that grid capacity too. So yeah, it is. I was at a meeting with somebody from DHL recently who said that the requirement, as it currently stands, for their fleet would be the electricity for every household in Bristol. So adding another Bristol to the grid all of a sudden, which is a huge amount. But I think this isn't something that we're saying is obviously going to be happening within the next 2 to 3 years. This is rollout of production by 2040. So by the time that you actually transfer those trucks to kind of taking over the full grid, the general life cycle for a HGV as run in use at the moment is kind of 8 to 12 years. So we're getting up to 2050. So the time to be able to get there, resolve those challenges, is still available. And I think a huge part of this, as it will start to come down to, particularly with depot charging, where you're outside of maybe those kind of larger hubs for warehouses, is independent energy production and storage too.
Great. Kathleen.
Hey, thank you. I just had a question. So the slide that you were talking about alternative fuels, right? Mm-hmm. So I know you did already concede that EHGVs are not ideal for water, for example, right? You've got already a product that weighs out on the road. Mm-hmm. When you add a battery, you're not making yourself more sustainable. Yep. Like, definitely not. So my question is, given the focus of your role, is there a degree to which you do endorse the usage of HVO, for example, for businesses like mine, because it is quite difficult to know what we're supposed to do, so for those who are not aware, like if you're like, a pallet of water is about a ton, right? So you are already weighing out when you go on the road. I can use 51-foot containers on the rail because I have dispensation to carry a heavier loads across short distances, both once in the north and once in the south. Yeah. But other than that, I'm kind of stuck. So is HVO still, because I was thinking about it, is it still right for me, or should I be looking at something else?
So because we're taking this whole system approach of looking at it across the whole entire transport sector, we just don't see it as being scalable to be able to run that. Obviously, completely understand where you're coming from about it seeming like it's the right approach. But if we start to have that look from all shippers, then we simply don't have the amounts that are required in order to decarbonise with shipping and aviation.
Thank you.
Very polite. Very polite. No. If you were first, you go. Right.
Thank you for both presentations. This is Emine Akgün from Heriot University. So my question is about the resiliency of transport infrastructure with regards to extreme climate events. Mm-hmm. So I think I'll ask you both. So within your context, how do you address this? Because we know UK road infrastructure, rail infrastructure, or transport network is against, like further vulnerabilities with regards to extreme weather events. So how do you address this? Because this is quite important if we are especially speaking about electrification, mm-hmm. because road network is strongly connected to the grid network. And if the charging infrastructure is not going to be resilient enough, so we cannot really talk about the electrification of HGVs. And I'm all for electrification of road freight and also rail freight as well. So I'm just curious about what you're thinking and how we are being prepared for this. Thank you.
I can go first. I think, it's a very fair point. I think the biggest opportunity, as it feels at the moment with this, comes back to the point I was saying before about battery storage as well. It's not just about having this energy there readily available straight from the tap. It's making sure that depots or charging points and charging infrastructure has the battery stored on hand, because that's also incredibly important anyway in terms of the way that we're able to operate at increasing grid capacity too. So I think it hopefully is a move that can help provide that security whilst also addressing a lot of other problems at the same time.
From my perspective, our move into rail freight was how we increased the resilience of our supply chain. So that was the step that we took, and increasing the proportion of what we move by rail is how we will further that. There's no great answer to your question though. So I know we've talked about the electricity grid and things, because of where our manufacturing facility is based. Like, I know firsthand that even expanding our manufacturing is problematic because we can't get the electricity we need to do so. We need substations upgraded, etc. So the best answer I can give you is to improve our rail offering as much as possible over the next 5 to 10 years, and that's about as good as we can do. The second part of it for me is the rail connections. So I know some of the people online were talking about potentially a terminal isn't for them, it won't work for them. It does make us more resilient, but the thing we need to be is then connected everywhere we stop, so that we don't add additional movements in and more risk into our supply chain as a result, and more cost and more CO2 as a result as well.
Hello, hi. So Jingjun Li from Heriot University. So my background is mainly in passenger mobility. So if I'm speaking nonsense, just feel free to correct me. So basically, if I understand the challenge of logistics sector, I think there are two main challenges. The first one is decarbonization, and then we talk a lot today about the electrification, right? And then another challenge that I personally think the logistics sector is facing is as a lack of driver. So in a lot of European countries, we are lacking of driver. And then these kind of things can be solved by the technology like autonomous vehicle, right? I was in Japan, I think 2 weeks ago, and I saw a lot of presentation in Japan, and they talk about like the autonomous vehicle automation always come in together with vehicle electrification. So when you are promoting vehicle EV, you are actually also, it will help you to grow more business into AV, right? So in your presentation, you talk a lot about you want to promote EHGV. So how do you view this vehicle automation technology in your business, and how do you feel this could help you? Do you view it as a separate technology, or you also think this can be promoted, the EHGV, and what is your strategy towards that?
It's a good question. To be blunt, we currently don't have a position on it. But it is something that people do talk about as going hand in hand, and possibly if we're going through this significant transition to electric vehicles, should we just bite the bullet and do both at the same time? I don't think that's necessarily where we are at the moment. I don't think that societally we're probably ready for that, and that people would be very accepting of that. But to come back to the point about the kind of the workforce crisis that the sector's facing, having spoken to a number of drivers who do drive electric trucks, and they often sometimes give them to some of the more experienced drivers, they find them so much easier to drive, and they find it far less stressful and far less of a strain personally and physically too. So there is the possibility that with moving to electric, that we're able to retain drivers within the workforce for longer because of that higher levels of satisfaction at the same time. So I think that's something for us to bear in mind, because obviously they are a lot simpler to drive, and you're not having to be constantly concerned with double-digit gearing.
Just really to agree with your point, that the driver shortage is still an issue. It's not quite as severe as it was in, I think it was 2022, where it was at its height. But I mean, without wanting to put too fine a point on it, given where we are, the answer to that is immigration, from my perspective, and I think from various other people's as well. So that's something that sits very much out with our control. The rail makes us resilient to those considerations, but certainly a huge part of solving that issue, given that our workforce is ageing out domestically, is exactly that.
Okay, Kenny online.
Hi guys, good evening. Tim, you opened up with a graphic that showed how far the UK was behind other nations in terms of investment and technology, and then went on to speak about a number of barriers to execution, about implementation in Scotland, including the grid, etc. When you correlate their investment to their grid capabilities in other countries, how far away is Scotland in enablement of that? In particular, I was curious on Austria being top of the list there in terms of investment.
Yeah, I mean so that was the registrations of new vehicles. So I think what we've seen there is, for the most part, I think particularly within Austria, is where we've had a number of sectors, or a number of the big operators who have moved quickly, and they moved early and been those earlier adopters, and we haven't necessarily had that within the UK so far, but we are starting to now. I think it's no surprise to see other people up there, such as Denmark and Netherlands, that are kind of smaller than the UK on the whole, but also a bit more compressed geographically. So they are able to be better focused and able to be better ready in terms of that underlying infrastructure that's required. But then just to go back into the point about particular operators who are kind of biting the bullet and moving large and at scale. As I said, we've had Amazon that have just moved to purchase 100 vehicles earlier this year, and have started to roll them out already. And I think that's probably a clear indicator that when you start to see people like Amazon that are starting to make the move, that they see the direction of travel as already kind of being there, and they're not doing it simply for the sake of it, but because that's where they see it being profitable for them over the course of the life cycle of those vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kenny. Sarah.
Yeah, is there a joined up discussion about actually having the charging capacity where it's needed? Because in the renewable CPG, we spend a lot of time talking about here's where we've got huge opportunities to produce new electricity, but where do you actually use it? And the further you transmit it, the less effective it is. But if you're actually having a much more strategic approach to railways and to HGVs using electricity, you could potentially get a much more joined up approach, because at the moment we spend, I think it's over £1 billion in the UK turning off turbines, which is just not sensible. So we're going to get more electricity produced, but where's the strategic joined up thinking, so that if you have got an HGV that is electric, you know you can charge it? Because if you sometimes look online, not all the charging points actually work in practice. So it's absolutely fundamental.
Yep, definitely. So The big crossover point for this is ports, really, because that's where we know a lot of HGVs are going, doing the loading and unloading, but also for the possible electrification of certain vessels as well in the future too. And then, of course, with it being ports, there's the opportunity for offshore wind or to be closer to that. Where we have warehousing infrastructure inland, that can often, for the most part, be much further away from where we're likely to see onshore wind farms or onshore solar farms, because they're in larger built-up areas as well. So it's not necessarily as easy to transfer across the inland, but there is still the ability to understand where those warehousing hubs are and start to build the initial grid connection to those. So that rather than be the case that individual depot operators are asking for a grid connection, they have to go straight to the grid, and it takes 7 years on the waiting list, and it takes £1 million to get the connection. You can pre-build it to within 5 kilometres and probably be pretty certain that you have a very good number of future need. But also, when you start to build that as well, you can start to create investment opportunities, because future warehousing needs will also then move to where those connections are.
Sorry, me again. Just again, as background, I sit on the CILT Freight Policy Committee, and also previously was on the Environment Committee, and so kind of close to some of these issues. We're very much focused on HGVs, and they're most visible and probably the most emitting vehicles. But back in COP26, there was a kind of very high level of the smaller vehicles. And just to the last point, one of the things that I think we should be considering a lot more to both the question and the last point is making it implicit in new warehouse developments. I'd be very interested in the makeup of Amazon's vehicle fleet. And how plugged literally that is into their own network on their sites. And I know of many sites, or a few sites certainly, which are pretty much self-sufficient in energy with turbines or whatever, and the two go hand in hand. Knowing one of the challenges of the wind farm developments that we've got is plugging them into the mains. And I know of various developments which are up and running, or up, but not plugged in because of the infrastructure. It would be, perhaps we could accelerate the whole EV development if the two were tied together from the start, such that you did not need a huge scale. And I can think of one site down in Bristol, Avonmouth, where they had their own facility, but if that was over-generating, then it also was able to provide power to other sites, and it became a commercial opportunity and a return on the investment for the people who developed it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it's a very fair point, and there's something in there too about how those larger companies can also support the electrification journey for smaller SMEs and freight forwarders too, by being able to be a provider of that charging requirements as they're doing the offloading. And just to use your point to make another point, which I haven't made so far, there's also the business opportunity for being able to sell the electricity back to the grid, because not only are you then running, but you've also basically got a huge battery just sat on your depot floor that's able to sell the electricity back to the grid, possibly, depending on how you're structuring your deliveries, when energy's most expensive. So similar to many people do with when they've got solar panels in their house, you can store up the energy or buy it when it's cheapest, then sell it back to the grid. So that also becomes a possible new revenue stream for business.
Okay, have we exhausted questions and comments? Good. Nobody else online? I just wanted to ask Dave Defoe, are you okay? You look a bit tired. You're concerned. You're worrying me, Dave. Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine. I've maybe been working too hard.
Okay. Well, just take it easy, Dave, because you're a good friend of this group. So.
Thank you.
Right. Good. Right. Right, well, I guess that's it. A couple of good discussions. Colin, you want to come in and say something?
Just on the next meeting, if that would be useful.
Yes, please.
So the third and final meeting in this session will be on Tuesday, 17th of February. The approach we took through the series is local to global. So the first was on last mile deliveries. Today has been principally focused on domestic freight. And the final will be on international supply chains. The speaker list is still to be confirmed, but I know that we have been looking at oil and gas and whisky insofar as those are Scotland's two largest export sectors. So we'll confirm the speakers in due course, and I suspect we'll also look to, if possible, look at shipping, because we haven't addressed shipping in the series.
Yeah, good. That's something to look forward to next year. So thank you all for coming. Thank you especially to our speakers. Another round of applause for them. And I shall close the meeting. Safe home, safe back to London when you eventually get the sleeper.
Yeah, till last time.